Shavua Tov. This week I'd like to talk about two fundamental concepts of the liberal outlook on life, on the world, and how they are at complete odds with the Torah, especially some of the underlying concepts in this week's Torah reading, Parshat Mishpatim. There's a story told about the yeshiva of the great Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. The students used to begin their Gemara study when they were at the age to start learning Gemara with the chapter of Elu Mitziot. These are the things that are found, which has the laws about returning lost objects. It's, how does one identify a lost object? How does one return it? Do they announce? And so forth and so on. All of those laws of returning lost property, which is one of the mitzvahs in the Torah. Well, some of the rabbis felt that this was a little bit not practical for the students because this hardly ever happens. Rather, they said, why don't we teach them the tractate of blessings, brachot, which deals with the laws of prayer and reciting blessings before eating food and after eating food, things that happen every day many, many times. It would be much more practical. So Rabbi Feinstein heard what the rabbis were saying, and he said, I understand, but no, we're going to keep teaching the laws of returning lost objects, the chapter of Elu Mitziot. Why? Because what are the children basically learning every time they open up that Gemara? They're learning, and he said it in Yiddish, Mentur nicht nehmen was ist jenems, which means you cannot take that which is not yours. Every day, you cannot take that which is not yours. Respect other people's property. Return lost objects. In other words, they are learning to be honest human beings, and that is far more important than learning the specifics of the blessings that are recited now and then. So that was what was the decision that was made. Well, let's discover what is meant by that which is not yours. I mean, on the surface, it obviously means something which is in somebody else's house, somebody else's wallet, somebody else's locker, whatever, is theirs. And things in the public domain are everybody's. But I think we will expand the definition of what is not ours to a surprising depth. There are many commandments in this week's chapter which talk about damages. Most of the parsha deals with damages, hitting animals, putting obstacles in the public domain that cause injury, fire, and so forth and so on. And one of the prohibitions is to hit one's parents. Now the punishment for that is one of the death penalties, the 4 death penalties that are given out by the rabbinical court. This is a very, very severe sin. And just parenthetically, I will mention that we have a lot of things in the Torah that carry with them the death penalty, and that is on the books, but in practice it was hardly ever carried out because the conditions for the death penalty to be implemented are very hard to meet. There must be witnesses, 2 witnesses who see the person about to perform the forbidden act. They must warn him, and they must say, if you do such and such, you're going to violate that and that commandment, and the punishment is going to be X, Y, Z, and the person has to then go ahead and say, I'm going to do it anyway, and then he has to do it anyway. So it's almost impossible that a death penalty would actually be carried out. So just so we should know, when the Torah says that there's a death penalty, it's more to teach us the severity of this particular sin rather than to be a practical matter. And the severity of hitting one's parents is obviously very, very strong. Now, there's a limitation on when the full transgression has been committed, and that is that the hitting of the parents must cause blood, must cause an injury. If it's not causing an injury, not that it's allowed, but you don't have that same penalty. And by the way, there is also a prohibition on causing injury to another human being as well, and that's included. But for the parents, it's especially strong because it involves the death penalty. Which raises a question that's raised by the rabbis in the Talmud, and that is, what if the child is a doctor or a nurse, and the parent wants to go to the child for medical treatment which involves blood, for example, to get a shot, to get an injection. They want to get the coronavirus vaccine, and that causes blood to come out when you get a needle. Is the child allowed to do that? So there's a discussion in the Talmud, and some rabbis say, yes, it's allowed, because the Torah forbids hitting, and hitting in the way of fighting, of attack, of injury, not of healing. If it's done for healing, then it's an entirely different ballgame. Even so, there were some rabbis who did not allow their children to remove a splinter or a thorn that might have gotten into them because they would cause blood to flow. So those rabbis would say, even though obviously this is allowed for someone else, but for a parent it's inappropriate, and therefore it's better that somebody else be the doctor for the parents. And that's indeed what the halacha states, that it's allowed, but it's better for somebody else to take care of the medical needs of the parent rather than the child if it involves bringing out blood. Okay, so there is a great rabbi who wrote a book called the Minchat Chinuch, and the Minchat Chinuch has a fairly extreme opinion on this, and he says that what happens when a person says to someone else, you know, you're not allowed to hit and injure someone. Let someone say someone says to someone else, go ahead, hit me, injure me, it's okay. Are they able to forgive in advance the other person, and is there then a transgression taking place? And so the Minchat Chinuch says, no, a person has the right, and a parent has the right to forgive in advance. They can say to their child, you can treat me medically, or they can even say in theory to the child, you can hit me and cause injury, and the child will not be guilty because the parent has been what we call in Hebrew mochel. They have given pre-forgiveness. Now this is a fairly extreme opinion of the Minchat Chinuch. I think most rabbis don't agree with it, but what is his source? His source is a very interesting passage in the Talmud. The Talmud says, what if somebody says to somebody else, take out my eye or cut off my hand? So the Gemara answers that the person is guilty. The one who carries that out is indeed guilty of having caused injury to the other person, even though the other person told them to do it, pre-forgave them, if you will. The Gemara asks a question. We have another source that says if someone says to someone, hit me and cause me injury, they are exempt, meaning that they are not held accountable to pay the damages. So what's the difference between the first case and the second case? The answer is the first case, he's asking someone to give him a permanent wound, to remove their eye or to cut off their hand, something which will not grow back, which makes them a blemished human being physically. And the second case is dealing where he would give him a temporary injury, something that would heal in the course of time. So the first case is much more severe, and there are a couple of explanations that are given as to why the first case is different. The first rabbi says, because of the reputation of the family, it will cause a blemish in the family. In other words, if the father is walking around without a hand that was cut off, so that is considered something that lowers the status of that family a certain amount. It might cause some to hesitate to marry into the family. For whatever reason, whether we feel that that's the case or not, there is something about aesthetics, and there is damage done to the reputation of the family. The second rabbi explains that no, because a person never intends to really forgive the loss of a limb. Now, that's a very powerful statement, because the person is saying, cut off my hand, take out my eye. He's saying he wants it. But the rabbis are saying, we know better. You think you want it. You think in advance that you want them to do this to you. But once it happens, you're going to realize that you did not want it. You're going to regret it. And therefore, we don't allow it in any case. In my synagogue, we talked one year on Shavuot, a lecture about the whole question of surrogate pregnancy. When a couple contributes genetic material and a woman agrees to be pregnant and to give birth to the baby, she'll receive a lot of money, and then she gives the baby to the people who gave her the genetic material. So this is a very cruel and terrible practice and should be discouraged. Why so? Because nature gets involved. The woman makes an agreement. She thinks she's getting a lot of money. She says, okay, it'll be 9 months. So I'll have the pregnancy, I'll have the baby, and I'll get $100,000 or whatever it is. And she doesn't realize that when she is pregnant with that baby and gives birth to that baby, nature will want her to keep that baby. Psychology will want her to keep that baby. And so many cases of surrogate mothers who, after the birth, go into deep depression for an extended period of time because of the loss of that baby. Now, they didn't know in advance that they would feel that way, but if they did, they certainly would not agree to it. And so it's the same concept over here. A person cannot in advance forgive the loss of a limb because they don't realize until after it's too late just how important and dear to them that limb was. In any event, so the Minchat Chinuch sees these cases and he says, well, the reason why that the person would be guilty if they cut off the person's hand or took out their eye is because the other person is not capable physically, mentally, psychologically of forgiving them. But if there would be a lesser severe case, like the next case where he says, hit me, injury on a temporary matter, there the person is capable of really forgiving, and therefore he would not be guilty, and therefore it would be okay. There's a problem with this idea of the Minchat Chinuch. The question it's a big question, because not only is it forbidden for a person to cause injury to their fellow, we're not even allowed to cause injury to ourselves. And that is also a biblical prohibition. One may not injure themselves, one may not cut themselves, unless obviously it's for healing. You have to take out a splinter, But one may not cause injury to oneself. It's not allowed. So if you're not allowed to cause injury to yourself, we have a rule in halacha that ein shaliach lidvar aveira. You cannot appoint a messenger to do a sin. If I say to somebody, hey, go over to the neighbors and steal their TV set. Who's the one that's really guilty? Not me. The one who actually goes into the house and steals a TV set, because we say there's no such thing as a messenger for a sin. The messenger is required to make his own moral choice whether he's going to follow on this mission or not, and if he chooses to, then he's the guilty party. So if somebody says to someone else, do something which is forbidden, I'm not allowed to cut myself, you cut me, then the other person is guilty because he's doing an aveira, a sin, and there's no such thing as being a messenger for a sin. So if one is not allowed to injure oneself, so then one cannot be mochel, one cannot pre-forgive, one cannot ask someone else to injure them. You'll ask, what about the case that we talked about when it's a non-permanent injury that he's exempt? The answer there is that he's exempt from the payment. He's exempt from paying the penalty, from the damages. But it still remains prohibited to do it in the first place. So that's a significant question on the Minchat Chinuch, so we'll leave the Minchat Chinuch with a question mark. But what do we see from here? We see from here that a very clear principle of liberal thinking is that my body is mine, I can do with my body what I want, as long as I don't hurt anybody else. That is wrong. Our bodies are not ours. Our bodies are given to us by God for the time that we are here in this world, and it is our responsibility to take care of them, to protect them. We cannot harm ourselves. It's like a person who works in a business and he gets a computer at the business and he loves working on the computer, and he says, I like this computer, I'm going to take it home. Excuse me, you're a thief. It's not your computer, it belongs to the company, and it's only yours to be used for doing your job. Well, in a sense, that's the way it is with us. Our bodies are given to us by God to do our job. Now, that's one of the concepts of the liberal thinking that my body is mine, and this especially comes to the fore in the question of abortion. Abortion is abhorrent to Jewish law and to Jewish practice. Only in extreme circumstances, when there is danger to the life of the mother and so forth and so on, are there situations. And each situation requires a competent rabbinical authority to be consulted. But as a matter of policy, abortion on demand, certainly in the latter stages of the pregnancy, after the 40th day already, is a terrible, terrible tragedy, and any normal human being will feel that such a thing is a horrible thing. But people say, no, it's the right of a woman to decide what happens with her body. But the fact of the matter is even according to that definition, it's still hurting somebody else. The unborn is a potential life. The unborn has holiness. The unborn should be protected as well, for sure. But there's also another pillar of liberal thinking, which we will now go into, and that is the first of the explanations we gave before about why a person cannot say to someone else, take out my eye, cut off my hand, is because of the damage to the family reputation. What do we see from here? Responsibility. You see, part of liberal thinking is that we have rights. The Torah does not talk about rights anywhere. Now, it's assumed that a person has the right to be alive, to be protected, to have their property protected, and that is true. But the Torah never says that. The Torah focuses not on the rights, but it focuses on the responsibilities. And in this week's Parsha especially, it talks about the prohibition about damaging someone else, and if you do, what you have to pay to compensate. It talks about our responsibilities to protect each other. Not in terms of their rights or our rights to have what we have, that our body is ours, what's ours is ours, we can do with it as we see fit. That's not true. We have responsibilities, and that's an entirely different focus. And a society that is constructed on the focus of responsibility is a society that is 1,000 times healthier than a society where everybody is insisting on their rights and pulling apart from each other. And we see such societies, just watch the news, tearing each other down. And that is a very sad thing to behold. Let's hope that sanity returns. So that's the first explanation, the idea that we have responsibilities. The second explanation of why a person may not say to someone else, take out my eye, cut off my hand, we mentioned, is because a person will not really know what they're forgiving when it comes to the loss of a limb, a permanent injury. And that is to teach us that the body that we have been given by God to use is the most amazing thing ever. We don't even understand how valuable it is. This person who says, cut off my hand, didn't appreciate what their hand was until after it was gone, and then it's too late, but then they regret it. Because there is magic in the amazing body that God gave each and every one of us to do our job. And the same thing with abortions. Oh my goodness, the cases of regret after the deed has been done are all over. And because a person doesn't sense until it's too late what this potential life was, what could have come from this pregnancy had it indeed been carried to term. And it's a tragedy and it's a sad thing. So no, we don't own our bodies. God owns our bodies, and we therefore must protect them. And if the doctor says you have to cut down the cholesterol, so then you have to cut down the cholesterol. And if the doctor says you have to protect, if society says that we have to protect ourselves against a virus, which we know is a deadly virus, whether it be getting the vaccine or using a mask or whatever, science knows. And it's true, science doesn't know everything, and they discover things as they go. But we have to give trust to the people who are working day and night to try and keep us healthy and safe. So all of these things that are part of preserving our health are not just nice things that we can do if we choose. We must, because our body is a gift from God. And we do not have rights. Well, we do have rights, but we shouldn't be focused on them. We are focused on responsibilities. So when Rabbi Moshe Feinstein said to his rabbis in his yeshiva, we should teach them the laws of mentur nicht nemen was es jemens. You may not take that which belongs to someone else, that they should learn to respect other people's property. Well, that includes our own bodies, and everything we have is a gift from God to be used for the highest and highest of purposes. And that is the way that we will live an exalted life, and that is the way, when we realize that we have responsibilities towards each other, that our society will grow together in love. May we soon be able to indeed physically come back into contact and be in the same place at the same time and enjoying spiritual growth together in our synagogues and cultural growth together in our concert halls, and just be able to live as a united people again. Shavua Tov.